Welcome everyone. I'm Jeanette Wright and I'm the State Librarian, and I'm very pleased to welcome you here to the State Library of Queensland for tonight's Game Changers event. As is our practice here, we like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and their ancestors, pay respects to their ancestors past and present. The State Library of Queensland is located on Kurilpa Point, which we understand to be a traditional meeting point. So it's a very nice tradition that we've learned from the Indigenous people. I'd also like to acknowledge and welcome Professor Peter Little, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor of Corporate Programs and Partnerships at QUT, Professor Robina Xavier, Executive Dean, QUT Business School, Ray Weeks, who's Chair of the CEO Institute and will be our interviewer this evening, and our special guest Nicole Hollows, who's a Queensland business leader, and members of the Library Board of Queensland, the Queensland Library Foundation, the QUT Business School, and the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame Governing Committee, who are our partners in this venture. And of course, we'd certainly like to acknowledge our generous donors and partners from Origin, Crow Horwath, Channel 7 and 4BC. And we're very appreciative of the support we get from our partners for the whole enterprise of the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame. And the Game Changers series is just part of that whole program. We began the Game Changers series this year as a way of expanding the program beyond just having the inductee dinner and the Hall of Fame for people to visit both online and here in the State Library. Because the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame is about celebrating, recording and retelling the stories of outstanding Queensland business leaders and their contributions to our state. Tonight we're privileged to hear the story of business leader Nicole Hollows, who was not only the first female chief executive of a major Queensland mining company, but also became CEO and managing director at a very early age of 34. So I'd like to welcome Ray Weeks to the stage to begin tonight's conversation.
Well, good evening and welcome to this, the third event in this Game Changer series, as Jeanette said, an initiative of the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame. Let me just take you through again what Game Changers is all about. It's about bringing leaders and innovation from business, technology and creative industries, our successful Queensland entrepreneurs who have built national and international businesses. They're here to share with us their stories, their insights, the key lessons that they've learned along the way. And we're here to understand how these leaders in building these companies engendered creativity, inspired teams, managed the dynamics of change and drove growth. You're going to hear one hell of a growth story today from Nicole Hollows. But also what we'll be exploring, the views throughout the series on leadership attributes required in this space. Now, as we know, I've said this to you before, but we all understand that these are clearly uncertain times and risk-averse times and fairly conservative times. And we need the game changers more than ever. Because, as I've said before, these are the ones more likely to create jobs. And a global survey of Ernst & Young showed that the majority of entrepreneurs, 54% of entrepreneur companies, are expected to hire people, as against something like 25% of corporates. Now, just to follow on from what Jeanette said, for someone who had no driving ambition to be a senior executive, Nicole Hollows has truly been a disruptive force. She was the only female, as Jeanette said, chief executive of a major Queensland mining company, which, as you know, is difficult to develop a successful career in a male-dominated industry, like the mining industry. You know how blokey that particular environment is. Nicole is recognised as one of Australia's most effective business leaders. In her 5 years as CEO and Managing Director of Macarthur Coal from, as Jeanette said, to the tender age of 34, She was pitched into the role, by the way, at very short notice. And we'll hear something about that tonight. She achieved some remarkable growth outcomes for the business. The company's market capitalisation when she became CEO, Managing Director, was $700 million. And when it was sold, or when Peabody acquired the company, 4 years later, the capitalisation was $5 billion. So it's a remarkable growth story. Nicole, I should say, is a QUT graduate. She's also alumnus of the year and is a member of the QUT Business School Executive Dean's CEO Strategy Group with Robina. She's on the board of the Queensland Museum Foundation and the Skills Queensland Board, and was formerly president of the board of the Queensland Resources Council. I've known Nicole for some time, and I can tell you that, and you're going to clearly see this tonight, she has this unbridled inquisitiveness that you find, I think, only in the best global leaders. And she is definitely no wallflower. She's passionate about skills and education. I should say quickly, she loves travel, reading and wine, usually together. So she's going to take us on her personal journey and give us an understanding of what has worked for her and not as a game changer. So please welcome Nicole Hollows. Now, Nicole, tell us a little bit about your personal journey and how you made the leap from accounting to the role as CEO of a global company. You might start with your father was in the army?
Yes, my dad was in the army, and so that meant I went to 4 high schools in 6 years, 2 different states. So change is not a difficult thing for me to embrace, and I don't have a problem talking to anybody really. And that's probably what Ray was getting at before. So I did grade 1 in Brisbane. I was born in Brisbane, and I did year 12 in Brisbane, but nothing in between. And since I've come back in grade 12, I've stayed in Brisbane working here, and this is my centre to date. Who knows what happens in the future. But in my journey, I did a Bachelor of Business degree in accounting with a major in accounting. I did all my electives as law, and then I did chartered accounting. I worked for a small chartered firm in Brisbane. After about 6 years, I was made an associate, and even after 1 year, I started supervising people, so I suppose I didn't hold myself back there. But my goal at that time when I started work was by the time I was 30, I wanted to earn $100,000 a year, and I do know that's materialistic. But my parents aren't very big income earners, so for me that was a lot of money, and that was what my ambition was, and I wanted to be a partner in a chartered firm. So when I was in my late 20s, I realised and I'd been talking to the main owner of the firm, and he'd offered it to me, and I realised that it was the only place I'd worked since I'd left uni, and that I needed to try something different. So I asked a client of mine for a reference. I never did get that. I probably keep saying that I need to probably get that from him, seeing I'm looking for a job now. And his name was Dennis Wood, and he actually said, well, had asked me for a coffee and said, well, you know, instead of I've started drafting your reference, why don't you just write it for me and I'll sign it for you. But instead, why don't you come for a job here where I'm looking at working? And I said, well, I don't even know this company. You know, what's your financial stability? Don't you worry about that. And I said, I'm looking at starting a family. You won't have to do more than 40 hours a week. And I'm thinking, oh, this is looking good, sounding very good. And so I actually did not make a deliberate decision to go into the mining industry. It was an opportunity that came across my path, and I said, well, I'll give it a go and I'll try that. And we had an agreement, because we knew each other too, that if it didn't work out in it, there would be no problems. Either party could, you know, say, this is not for you, and otherwise I could go. And after a year there, I actually got offered my dream job, probably in a large chartered firm. And I spoke to both Ken Talbot, who was the chairman of the company at the time. And to put that in perspective, that company was owned by 7 joint venturers, 4 Japanese, a Chinese, an American and an Australian company. And that Australian company then became Macarthur Coal. And so I had 7 different bosses, but my direct boss said, no, I think you really should stick with this. This is going to, you'll grow and you'll still be challenged and you'll learn. And then Ken sent me to Harvard in 2001. He wanted me to think more like an executive and less like an accountant, and that's what he told me, and that's why I should go and do a course to do that. And so off I went. The second day of that course was the September 2011, and I was in Boston where planes had come from, so that was quite surreal. And then when I came back, he said, I realise that you're global, you'll think differently now, you will not ever look at the world the same way. And I think he was right. He actually rang me at home that day and I thought I was going to be sacked because he'd never rung me at home. And then I went to being the CFO of Macarthur Coal when he offered me that. It was about a year after it listed. So when Macarthur listed in 2001, it listed for 128 million market cap at the time. And then for me, being the CFO at that time was quite daunting. I knew nothing about listed public companies. I came from a small firm, so I hadn't even done audits. Thank goodness, was very good at financial reporting, and I was good at my PY subjects in that area. And so I knew how to do it, but I'd never done it before. And I think it's difficult when you go into an area where you don't have a mentor in that area anymore, because I was the CFO, so there was no one to help me in terms of those financials. And it doesn't look quite right when you ring the audit partner to ask him how to do something. So it was then, so you sort of learnt the hard way, and you still asked questions, but sometimes you had to figure a lot out on your own. Then the company made the decision to go owner-operator in 2006, I suppose. 2 years before that, we adopted a little girl, so I became a mother, and my husband and I both went part-time for a year, so I asked the board, as the CFO of a publicly listed company, that could I go part-time? And my response was, they don't know of any CFO of a publicly listed company that's gone part-time. So then I sold a lot of my shares in Macarthur at $2 something, which was not smart. And I then went... and then Ken and a number of the directors came in and said, look, we'd really like to give this a go. If someone's going to make this work, we think you'll make it work. We can have honest, open conversations with you if it's not working. So we're prepared to support you to do that. And that was great because I worked an average about 50 to 55 hours a week that year. I was part-time. But I basically worked from home for a lot of that time. But that allowed me that flexibility and to be able to have the best of both worlds. I then came back at the beginning of 2006, and so it was in the August that the board had asked me when we made the decision to go owner-operator at one of our mines. So it was contracted, we were doing the mining ourselves. And if I wanted to be the deputy CEO, because Ken was an entrepreneur, he was the CEO, he was a very wealthy man, he didn't really need to be involved in the nitty-gritty day-to-day, and that was really not where he was getting his passion from. And you needed somebody to be doing that if we were going to be doing the mining ourselves. And I ummed and ahed about that. I stepped up to the opportunity. Again, a mentor told me he'd have more respect for me if I did that, then I took the easy way out. And I then, 2 months after that though, was told not to attend a mine site visit. I was rung on the Sunday by the company secretary. And I was then told I was basically an acting CEO. And then I became the CEO. So in the 2007 financial year, I had 4 titles. I started the financial year as CFO. I became Deputy CEO, Acting CEO, CEO and MD.
So let's talk about then the challenges you faced as being one of the youngest CEOs in the industry, and even younger as a CFO. Take us through some of those big challenges you came across.
I think being young as a CFO, you're probably not taken seriously. The first roadshow I did with Ken, so when you're a public company, you present to analysts and fund managers who invest in you, and they all thought I was his secretary because I was doing the PowerPoint, and because he didn't know how to work the PowerPoint, and I was sitting at the end, and they all turned around shocked that when he couldn't answer a financial question and I had to respond. And so I suppose one of the challenges were that you were younger and you're a female, and people probably didn't expect that. The other part was, as CEO, it was quite challenging in all my subordinates who were my peers before became my subordinates, who were all older than me and had more experience in the industry than me and were outside of my area of expertise. So that's pretty daunting.
And you would have had some big challenges being a female in a male-dominated industry. Just tell us about maybe some of the responses you got as a female CEO.
So as generally you're the only person in the room in the meetings, and it wasn't that in the last few years. The industry's worked really hard to get more women in the industry, but generally I was the only female, so you do feel isolated at the time, but you couldn't let that get you down. You just had to get in there. And I think in hindsight, because I've been asked this question a lot and you've had a lot of time to dwell on it in the last year, I actually also think where women, it's harder because you lack that confidence at times and women have a different style. For me, I'm an extrovert and I don't mind asking questions and I got brought up that way. We're all entitled to have an opinion. So I didn't have a difficulty there and I had good supporters in the company. But I think it is hard for women in male-dominated industries because of that. And the other thing I think is really difficult is we come across sometimes as seen as aggressive versus assertive, where a male I think would be seen as assertive. That's a bit controversial, I know, but I felt like I wanted to say that.
That supports Sheryl Sandberg, doesn't it?
Yes, I've just finished reading that book. It's a fantastic book.
Good. So you had to make some major changes with Macarthur Coal, and there would have been like redundancies and so on. There would have been, again, some interesting reactions to the changes that you were making.
Well, when I first became CEO, the fact that that the dynamics in the management team had changed, and also we'd just become mining ourselves, which we'd never done, is I put a lot more structure and processes. And so there were a lot of people who didn't like that, and because we were an entrepreneurial company. But we were also a top 200 company then at the time, and we needed to continue to step up our governance and our systems and processes for the size and the complexity of our business. And sometimes that wasn't taken well. And the other part was just dealing with technical people was difficult in that, it wasn't my area of expertise, but you have to be able to ask questions, and it just comes back to, if you look at the business drivers, the drivers of the business, and the fact that you understood the business as being the CFO, and I'd been there a long time, that gave me the confidence to be able to ask the questions.
And based on your background as an accountant, what do you think you were like as a strategic thinker? How did you go about developing your strategic thinking skills?
Well, the comment before with the Harvard Business School Ken wanted me to think more like an executive. And I think it's an often thing that where it's been spoken about that financial people, and there's surveys that say one of the biggest things that CFOs lack is strategic thinking. But it's something that's not really taught to any executives, and I don't think having a finance background is any different to a legal or an engineering background, in that if you're not taught to think strategically, then how do you really expect your executives to be able to do that? And I think that was smart about Ken seeing that. And what we did in our organisation is I felt that ability to think strategically, and really then how are you going to be able to execute if you can't think like that in the first instance, was we rolled out our own, with a training provider, our own training to our executive team on strategic planning and strategic thinking. And some executives felt that they knew it and they didn't have to go, and I said, I'm still going, and I've done the courses and we're all going, it's compulsory. And I really had to do that to make it that people attended the course. Because it was critical, because we weren't getting it right, and we didn't have our strategic plan up to speed.
So when we're thrust into leadership roles, we all go through that learning process. It's amazing what we don't know about leadership when you move into a CEO role for the first time. What were the most valuable lessons you learned from those early days of working in mining that you think you implement in business practice today?
I think it comes back to understanding the business process. So I think that was really finance and a mining background. Is the basics, the foundation of it is not difficult, and if you understand the foundations and the process, so what are the real drivers in mining? It's about getting the coal out of the ground, and then what do you need to do to get the coal out of the ground? And that productivity, efficiency, they're all important, and that really is probably what you still use today in business. The other part was those early days in mining, and particularly when I stepped up, is different audiences in that, as chartered you understand how to deal with different clients, but they're generally, they're generally business people who I was dealing with, and where I had to sit there and I had to communicate with fund managers who had $1 billion funds, who understood business but might not have known anything about coal, and others who took down to the, to the corporate office and then to the mine site, and where you've got your truck drivers that you've got to deal with, and the same talk doesn't actually get the message across. Showing up like this is probably not really going. What isn't, one, you're not allowed, and two, so you've got to cater for the different audiences, and that's probably something that I've understood a lot better. And if I think that's probably something I've carried through a lot more, became a lot more aware of that.
So in your CEO role at Macarthur Coal, is there anything you would have done differently?
Absolutely.
What are the big things there?
Look, major decisions, probably not. What I would have done differently is I wish I was more self-aware earlier, and one of my things is I talk too much, and I know that, and it's really, really hard to work on that. And so the positive of saying that is active listening. And
I was told I was going to get 2 questions in tonight.
So that's something I've really had to work on. I wish if I was more self-aware and I understood my impact on others, and when you realise that how people perceive you and the impacts are nothing like you want them to be, that it's really easy to change your ways then. Whereas when you really hadn't sort of dwelled into that, so if I was more self-aware, the process of how I dealt with things, and particularly people issues, would have been differently. And the other thing is I would have said no, because we were like kids in a candy store sometimes. When and as you grow, you've got money, you're getting larger, any coal projects people came to you on and they looked really interesting, it's interesting stuff, your executive team thinks it's all the sexy stuff you work on. And so someone's got to be in the team saying, look, we just don't. And we wasted a lot of time because it was a distraction, and we should have just been able to say, look, that doesn't fit. But the advantage was our strategic planning. When we put our strategic plan and what our core areas and opportunities we'd look at, so anything that fell out of that, it was a no absolutely straight away. I wish I'd done that a lot earlier than put it in the last couple of years. That would have made life a lot easier.
So talk about the personal attributes, do you think, the key personal attributes of a leader, and take us a bit more on your own your leadership style and what you focused on as a CEO.
Okay, I think when I attended Harvard, I got the opportunity to hear Jack Welch speak, and I sat in the front row. Actually, he was sitting like this being interviewed, and I was probably just sitting where Teresa is here, and said, well, and he got asked that question. It was in his book, and he said, and I think he encapsulates it well, 4 E's wrapped in a P. So you've got to have edge, energy, energise others, and you've got to be able to execute, which he said most executives lack that capability, which I agree with. But wrapped in a P for passion, and I really believe that. So when I've spoken at speeches and I talk on leadership, I say there's really 4 areas. One, you've got to have vision, be able to communicate that, and the way you get there is your values have to underpin that. The second one is that you've got to leaders are accountable. They've got to stand up to the consequences. The buck stops with you as a leader, and particularly as a CEO. And therefore you have to have resilience, because sometimes you get it wrong, sometimes you make mistakes, and you've got to deal with challenges continually that are outside of your control. GFCs, floods, droughts, market, volatile share price. You can't control a lot of those things, so you've got to be resilient to deal with them. The third was enable others, lead others. If you can't lead others and empower them, then you're not a leader. And the fourth is you've got to have perspective. So you've got to be able to see the big picture and be able to balance, and that whole work-life balance. In my earlier days, I thought working hard was going to get me there, and it doesn't actually. Working hard can help you, but it actually then you can get tired, and you generally then don't make the best decisions, and you're not as efficient. And so my leadership style from when I started, even as a CFO, you're a leader of your finance team. It was very, very different to near the end, even from the beginning of the CEO to the end of my tenure there at Macarthur. And my goal is to be very participative, and I work really hard at that. But my innate leadership style, and I've done plenty of leadership surveys to tell me this, is that flexible or adaptable, and that I like to be participative and collaborative, but I also like to get there quick. And I'm really happy to change along the way. So I'm happy to make a decision on the best facts, and something changes, well, okay, let's go. Well, that's really frustrating for other executives to deal with and understand, because, well, hang on, you made that decision here. Why aren't we still sticking with it? Well, the facts have changed, the circumstances are different, so the direction we take is different. Well, that's very hard to try and manage, and that whole point, being more self-aware and understanding your style, made me a better leader at the end. But that's probably and very informal. I'm no different in my leadership team than I think you.
That's an interesting point, because Jack Welch was asked what's the best advice he ever got, and he said when he's appointed CEO of General Electric, there's something like 100,000 employees, and he's a young CEO like yourself in his late 30s, and he went to his first board meeting. He's got his tie, he's all buttoned up, and he's looking a bit stiff and formal. And a director walked up to him and said, "Jack, I've got just 2 words of advice. We appointed you because of who you are. So be yourself. Just be yourself. That's.
Well, I think that's the authentic leadership, and I absolutely...
So, but that'd be you, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. It's my detriment too at times, because you don't come across as polished, off as polished, and you play the part. So when you're presenting in front of investors, you play the part, and you dress the part, and you look the part. You can't walk into a room and just pretend you're somebody else, and I think a lot of leaders feel that they should. And I think the days of being a leader and you put them up on a pedestal and that and you look down at other people, that it doesn't happen. And I think you should be honest and true to yourself, and people see through it anyway if you're not. And so one of my whole thing is that I liked your comment, the unbridled inquisitiveness. It's that sometimes Ken used to say to me, you're high energy like our coal, Nikki, and sometimes you just got to hold yourself back, and you do have to do that because that you intimidate other people when you go really fast as well. So
where do you feel you lost it when you felt that this was not going to work, and how did you recover?
The GFC. That came really quick in the mining industry, just like it probably hit everywhere else. In the space of about 2 weeks, we had lost about 30% of our sales, and we'd called a management team together, and I said, look, we're going to have to make some tough decisions. I jumped on the aeroplanes, I spoke to customers, and nobody was going to take our coal. And we sell our coal in US dollars, so we have hedge books, $90-odd million. That had to be closed into it. We just were financing our equipment at the time, $90 million as well. We had about 5 financiers to choose from. That all fell through in the space of a couple of weeks. The $100 million that we had in the bank account diminished pretty quickly too. And we were like, how are we going to get here? And the team, nobody really wanted to make the tough decision. And I said, look, we're going to have to cut costs and we have to cut production. And that means we have to put off some of our people. So we had to make a decision in the space of 5 days, in actual fact, because the sales were literally falling off a cliff. At that, we cut production 25%, we cut people 30%. And it was less than a week before Christmas. So it was extremely tough. And I got challenged on that. I went up to the mine site and did the redundancies myself. And because I figured that's what a leader does, I ultimately made the decision, and I have to live with that consequence. And, I got challenged. I remember when I asked for Q&A, I explained the reasons why we were doing it for the survival of the company, and that I got asked, well, your values are value people, how could you do this? And I said, well, one of our other values is talk straight. And the fact that I value you all is why I'm telling you now, and we know we're going to make that decision. Because who would want to go and spend all that money and spend their time at Christmas time, come back, and then find that they don't have a job? And that was heart-wrenching. There were lots of tears too. But you couldn't cry in front of staff either. And I think as a female, I wouldn't have said that if I hadn't read that Lean In book. So thank you, Cheryl. Because I think it's important for women as leaders too that and I've seen men cry as well. But it was extremely tough because people had to get put off through no fault of their own. But because we were transparent and open, we got most of those people back. So that is how we recovered. We got the majority of those people back in our organisation because, thank goodness to China, took coal. And, within a year we're about back up to full production. But if we didn't do that, our company probably wouldn't have been sold for $5 billion. It probably would have gone belly up. Our share price went down to just over $2. So it was less than half. It was very low. And we sold at $16, just to put that into perspective, a few years later.
Ken sold at $20.
Yeah, the year before.
The year before, that's right.
Oh no, earlier that year.
Was it?
Yeah, December 2000, earlier that year. So we went from $14 to $2, $22.
So Nicole, tell us about your appetite for risk and how well considered were the risks at each stage of your development?
In my appetite, I can take risks, but I like to understand what the consequences of those risks are. And if you do it with your eyes wide open and everyone knows we're taking those risks, I'm comfortable with that. Sometimes, I've surprised myself with the risks that I have taken. Personally, it was a big risk for me to step up to that deputy CEO role. As I said, we were going to do the mining ourselves. I'm not a technical person, I was a financial person. And, I had lots of people that I had to lead and manage who were outside my area of expertise. And that was really daunting. In fact, that was the headline on the Courier Mail when they asked me, and it was extremely difficult. And that would probably be the biggest for me, is going up to that deputy CEO role. I don't have anything more to say. I could rabbit on forever, but I won't.
So, growth and success, which we've spoken about, cover a lot of mistakes. Mm-hmm. Describe how you've underpinned your success with a focus on financial discipline, efficiency, and so on.
So my success for financial discipline and efficiency, I think the fact that you have structure and process, and you were sort of developed that way through your career, meant it was a lot easier for me to look at decisions on efficiency, on cost-benefit analysis. And a lot of people don't actually, you can get emotion, get into the transaction and you want to do the deal, or you want to just steamroll through it, and you can't. The efficiency, actually, if you look at efficiency, whether you're chartered, you're an accountant in the corporate world, mining is very similar. It's all about getting the coal out of the ground and getting it out more efficiently, and that comes back to productivity. And so it really helped me in my role, whether I was the CFO or the CEO, and any executive. And I think that's one thing that other executives must actually ensure that they do, is to get that financial discipline in some form or another, that they've got to look at things at cost benefit. You know, if you're going to invest in something, you've got to do an NPV or have some kind of valuation metrics. And you'd be surprised how many times things like that don't happen.
And you were recognised for encouraging innovation in the company, in your business practices and in all areas. Take us through how you encourage that continual innovation.
You know, it was extremely difficult as we got bigger. You know, when I started there was 7 people in the organisation, so it was really easy to be innovative. Let's whiteboard it, and you had Ken as the entrepreneur driving it. But one of our other values was lead the way, and what that said is be leaders in everything that we do. And that was about being innovative. And what we went to great pains to explain to people was, it's not about generating a new product. Too many times I think people think innovation is that traditional word, more like R&D or a new product. And I said, the receptionist can be innovative in how do you deal with with people ringing and not answering the phone, streamlining processes, and continually looking at technology on how you can assist to streamline those processes. We can be more efficient. Let's communicate the issues when we come off the mine site and the shift if something's not working. That I think is still being innovative. And if you get employees engaged and they want to be there, then I think it allows that space and for people to want to add value anyway. So it's pretty easy, if you have a better culture, to be able to drive that innovation.
And a recent HBR article said there are 4 distinct skills lacking in most entrepreneurs: managing themselves, planning and organising, analytical problem solving, and empathy. How does this relate to you? How would these relate to you, these attributes?
Well, I'm not an entrepreneur, but I like being entrepreneurial in some things that I do. I think that's why I know entrepreneurs, and Ken didn't lack all of those attributes. And I know executives who lack some of those attributes. So I don't think it necessarily relates to entrepreneurs. I think for people, they've got to understand their boundaries. In my earlier years, I needed to, Ken pulled out, stop looking at all the detail and being so analysis-driven. It's not about the accuracy when you're doing a life of mine model and you don't know what the FX rate's going to be next month. So don't worry about having it to the X dollar or 100,000 out in a capital program is not going to be, you're wasting too much time on that. And when you're a financial person, you want to have that structure in the process, that's what you've got taught. And so, but you realise that, the 80, and the good old 80-20 rule, and that's something that I've learnt to develop a lot more. And I think because I always like the bigger picture, and, I remember a lecturer at uni said they didn't think that I'd actually wondered why I wanted to be an accountant, because I didn't really have that typical personality. And I think so probably I probably would have been asked that I probably lacked empathy as well, in that I'm quick thinking and I just want to get on with it, and I'm outcomes focused and driven. And so sometimes when you're achievement focused and you're going through the outcome, you come across that whole perception, that whole self-awareness thing, and you do care about people and you absolutely do understand your impact, but I thought it was more important to get to the finish line. And I realised that it's not much fun when you get to the finish line, you've done it and nobody's with you. So, and they're back at the start line. And so, you know, and when I did some coaching and I dealt with a number of different coaches, and the best thing I remember he told me was, you know, you can run and you can sprint, then you have to pause and stop, look back, let everybody catch up, then run and sprint, and then and that was a really good analogy for me, because it let me realise that I could still work at my pace, but I have to allow other people to have their space to work at their pace, and so that, and to bring them with you. And if you don't, you just don't have buy-in, and it's really, really hard work, because you don't actually celebrate the success the same way, and it's not sustainable.
So you would have been a big believer in dispersed leadership?
Yeah, well, I mean, as a CFO, delegation, and that was very easy to do, but it became hard where, you know, you felt if you got in harder and you'd worked harder and you tried to do some of those things that you'd get there quicker, but all you actually do is just annoy everybody else in your team.
Do you think, coming back to innovation for a moment, do you think innovation today is more difficult?
I probably shouldn't have admitted that, but anyway. I just realised that it's live again, it's being filmed, I forget, it's not just this audience.
There's a whole bunch of stuff you've got to reveal here. Come on. Is innovation today more difficult, do you think, than any other time?
I think disruptions to innovation, so if you're much more an innovative company, then those disruptions are quicker and it would be more difficult in that respect. But I look at it from the mining side, that it is more difficult to be innovative. Like, you know, you can't just keep making the trucks bigger. You've got to actually look at being smarter, and I think it comes back to the people and how we address that, and using technology as well. But I also think it's easier in that you have, you've got technology to help streamline processes and to do that. So I think that's a tough one. I think you could argue both ways, but I definitely think, you know, I wouldn't cut it, I think, in IT and dealing with in that area, because that's very quickly changing and it's not my strength.
We talk about the key surprises as a CEO. When you come into the CEO role, there's a bunch of big surprises you get. One for me was, in the CEO role, that you bear responsibility for the results, but you can't control most of what will determine it. And the more power you have, the harder it is to use. That's a great paradox. Absolutely, that's very true. That's very well worded, Ray. Oh, thanks very much. Thanks very much. So tell me, firstly, how do you feel about that? And what were the big surprises for you as a CEO? I think you just articulated it. I probably could only add a little bit in that, you know, you think you're the boss. When you become the CEO, you think, oh yeah, I can be the boss, and you realise that if you don't empower your people, you're the boss in some, but you don't really control the processes. The example I'll give you is safety. Is, you know, I could end up in jail when I was the CEO if we didn't have proper processes for safety. But I don't control what a mine truck driver does on the mine side, but I can definitely influence it, and I think that's where you've got to understand where you can influence and where you're best influencing, and managing those risks. But you've got to empower people, and it comes back to culture. If you have the culture right, those risks are easier to manage, but you don't control the external environment. That's right. How do you, your financial background... I'll have to get that quote from you later. I'll get to you later. I really like that. How do you, just the importance of your financial background to your success as a CEO. Can I just come back to that for a moment? Well, I think, first of all, if I wasn't the CFO in the organisation, I wouldn't have been able to do the CEO role. I mean, I knew the company well, and so, and I think the stage where we went in the company, where we were doing the mining ourselves, you know, some would argue having a technical person might have been better, but I felt that putting that structure, the rigour, risk management processes, performance management, you know, that's something I rolled out that wasn't actually throughout the organisation, and some people didn't really like that either. And we had it all in the finance team, so the finance team had performance reviews every year and got managed that way, but half of the company probably didn't either. So, and I've said, well, how do we hold our people accountable all the way down and ensure we deliver if we don't do that? So I think that's where that financial background really helped me be a CEO, because as you get bigger, you know, when we got taken over, we had 1,500 contractors and employees, and, you know, you can't just run things without some of that structure and that discipline and processes. So, you know, it helps on a safety perspective too, environmental risk management.
for me to learn that side of it was easy because you had to do risk registers, you had to understand risk management. So it was a real strength in a lot of those areas.
So the sale of Macarthur coal to Peabody was a great success for Macarthur coal.
Yeah, that's especially now.
There's no question about that. But what are your thoughts on foreign investment in Australian mining companies?
Look, I think it's really disappointing that we don't have a lot of Australians supporting Australian mining companies. Macarthur was foreign owned before Peabody took us over, majorly, and most people don't probably realise that. And most of mining is owned, and this is an issue with agriculture as well. But Australia needs it. If you don't have foreign investment, then you're not going to be able to have growth, and we're not going to have the great quality of life that we all live, because mining contributes to that a lot, and it wouldn't happen without foreign ownership. And I know it's hard, and we've got to manage that. But, 20 years ago it was the Japanese, now it's the Indians and Chinese. Before that it was the Americans. Australia wouldn't be where it is today without foreign ownership, and I think we've got to acknowledge and recognise that.
Do you distinguish between Chinese and other companies' investment in Australian mining companies? In other words, with some state-based
Yeah, I don't believe in having that differential view, because I would argue in other companies in other countries are seen the same way. They're just not called state-owned enterprises. But countries can influence companies in the non-Western world particularly. So I think it's hard where Chinese, our major shareholder after Ken sold out was a Chinese investment arm, CITIC, and we found them a great shareholder, very supportive, we could work with, and they supported us on our journey. So I haven't had a bad experience, and I don't think we should differentiate. What we should do is ensure the assets are managed appropriately. So, significant assets, maybe you might have to monitor and deal with the consequences of making those decisions.
And tell us about your thoughts on government regulation and tax in the mining industry in less than 15 minutes.
Okay. I could talk all day on this, and I think if you asked anyone in the mining industry, and I think the circumstances where we are today, it's really bad that we are in those circumstances. You've got to look at the positive out of every negative situation, and the big positive is that the fact that we are here shows that the industry can't continue to pay. I think governments, communities, people at large don't fully understand the mining industry, how capital intensive it is, that it's a very cyclical industry. You generally work on the 2 bumpy years, good years in every 10 years, the 2 down years, and you have those bumpy years. So the principle I had against the MRRT, or the RSP, resource rent tax originally, was you make those super profits for a year or 2 in 10 years, but you've got to fund it when you're not making any profits for another 2 years in that 10-year cycle, and you've got to put it in the bank for the rainy day. And it's been rainy days over the last few years. So we are over-regulated and we're over-taxed, and I think the carbon tax, the MRRT, the regulation. Now, I'm not saying so I'm very conscious that the environmental hurdles shouldn't change. I'm not saying about that, but we could streamline processes. EIS is 10 volumes long, which is an environmental impact study. There's things that you do that I don't think are at any value. It's how do you streamline that and do what's really required is understand the impacts, the social impacts, the community impacts, the environmental impacts. There's no swerve on doing any of those things, but there's a lot of other things that you do that takes 2 years to do one now. And that is where I think, and that all comes at a cost. When the carbon tax came in, we estimated what it was going to cost Macarthur Coal was $500,000 a year, just to manage that tax. And that's not paying the emissions. And to me, the government has mixed, and I'll leave it at this for after this one because I could go, has mixed a revenue issue and an environmental issue. And if it's really about climate change and helping the environment, then you should have offsets, and we should be forced to invest in technologies that will find ways in the future. Because Australia in 10 years' time, the only thing that will happen is the coal will be mined elsewhere, it's lower quality, and therefore it puts more emissions into the world. And we can't just put little windows up around Australia and protect our air that we breathe. And so I just think, but I think it's, and I've flown to Canberra and said that to to ministers and tried to get that message across in that there's ways, and as an industry, you know, I've never heard anyone say we just want to keep polluting or we want to do that. We want it to be sustainable. We have to address that. Social pressures have changed the way mining companies do things, and we have to be, you know, you have a social licence to operate, and if you don't do it, you're not going to be there. And so I think there's a lot of regulation that could be self-regulated and not as being over-regulated by the governments.
So what are your thoughts on the continued growth of the resources industry? There's a lot of debate about it.
It's going to be extremely tough. You know, gas is really the only thing that's booming at the moment, and you know, I think that they're under cost pressures. I think that there's a study that I pulled out when I was consulting at QIC. Jackson Partners did it, I think, and they said 40%. Australia, the east coast of Australia's infrastructure costs are 40% more than elsewhere in the world. Now that just epitomises where we're at in terms of our costs have blown out of control, we're over-regulated, we just have costs upon costs, our people aren't skilled enough to be able to do the work, so you need more people to do the same work, you have to pay them a lot more, and you know, that cost differential, it means we operate in a global environment, we have to be globally competitive, and we've lost that edge, and if we don't do something about it to try and change and get ourselves back there, then long term, you know, we've got issues as an industry.
And average wages here, I think, at the moment are twice
what
the US is.
Yes, so, you know, yeah, twice, 2 to 2.5 times. So a truck driver here would earn 2 to 2.5 times more than what a truck driver in the US would. You know, you earn $100,000 a year and you're 5 days on, 5 days off. And, you know, they are away from their families and, you know, and there is a safety risk, so that there should be payment for that. But because of the productivity issues as well, and where the coal prices are, money's not being made at the moment in coal mining, and majority of producers in Australia aren't making any money. Now, you know, and everybody thought we could continue to pay and would start slugging taxes on us. So that it just shows that it's a cyclical industry, we're in a downward cycle, and it's going to be tough for a number of years.
Tell us, let's come back to Macarthur. Tell us about the DNA, the culture of Macarthur Coal, and what you wanted to see, and maybe the changes that you weren't able to introduce.
That would have to be one of my proudest things. You know, I love being able to say we're the #1 highest performing stock in 10-year period. I can thank Peabody for being #1. Without the takeover, we were #2 in our own right. So 1,068% return. And but the one I'm most proud of that you worked hard on, because I don't really control where the share price goes and what the coal price is the culture. And, you know, we had 4 pillars. I think I've mentioned a couple of them. So lead the way, value people, talk straight, and work together. When we started out, when Ken was when we were small, it was work hard, play hard, and that worked well. But when you start dealing with investors and they're saying, you know, when you're starting to be a couple of $100 million, $300 million, so what, you know, what, and some people ask this, what's your culture and what are your values to invest in you? And work hard, play hard doesn't come across too well. So we worked really hard on structuring on how we had values. And we got everybody in the organisation to work out those. And we've tweaked them over a number of years. But then we had a difficulty in it, in that people like Talk Straight, for example, we had to go to great lengths and had workshops on the mine sites and in the corporate office, was to say what the behaviours, and we made everybody look at determining those behaviours, because I could write them down but I wouldn't get buy-in. And so we made everybody go through and articulate what that meant to them, because it means, you know, listening, it means speaking with respect but being honest, and it's not telling someone they're an idiot or you don't like them or I don't, you know. So we had to work at that talk straight, particularly as we got bigger. You had to be more professional too, those things, and the world's changed with how things operated 10 years ago to how they do now. And so we had those pillars, and I think, and I'll give you an example, we did our employee engagement and it was 55%, and we did it 3 years later and I wanted to slip my wrists. And I remember some of our team saying, you know, it's a long journey, it'll take time, because it didn't get much better the next year, and we had done so much work toward it. And I realised then I was part of the problem as well, and so I fessed up with some of my faults and corporate-wide and said, you know, we're all going to be, this is what we really want to be. We want to be a high-performance culture, and that's what we're defining it, and we're amending the structure and the systems and the processes to be able to get us all to be able to be that. And the reason we want is we want people to come to work And when you sit there and you think 45% of your people, like nearly 1 in every 2 people come here and they're not really engaged and want to be here, that's not anything to be proud of. So we got that up to 76% and we were in takeover every year. And I thought that was a pretty good outcome to get that. Now that came through communication and actually just listening to people. And it wasn't about paying them more. It was about listening, providing some flexibility. We reinforced learning and development plans. It was really important for people, and valuing people really. And I think, you know, we're all people at the end of the day. It's pretty basic, some leadership stuff when you get down to it. It's hard sometimes to put that into practice all the time.
So based on that culture, and you had a culture of change as well, how did you select the people that you wanted to work for?
It's the same thing, cultural fit. Absolutely, and you and I have had that conversation before over wine. But it is. It has to be, because if you don't if you don't have the right people on the bus, I used to say, then you might be able to put a seatbelt and restrain them, but you have to boot them off, because they undermine everything that you were trying to achieve if they're not on board with how you want to do things. And
they're the people also that really are delivering the numbers, but they're not delivering the behaviours that support the values.
Yes, and the hardest thing is when you have to put people off who are very good at their jobs, but the way they're getting about it is not right. So, we wouldn't tolerate bullying, and, if that occurred, and we had to put people off who, we went through the exercise, and we had to. There was no choice, and even no matter how good they are, it's about the process and the how you do it, and it's very, very important. And there's no swerve on that. The other thing is making sure your selection criteria is right. Same thing, you'd be amazed how many people who don't have training on how to interview people. My big tip is always ask a person a question that the answer's no to, because most people hate saying no. And if you know that they don't know how to do that, or it's no, and they can't say it and they worm around, then they're not going to be able to ask questions, or they're not going to be able to admit they don't know how to do this, or they need assistance. And to me, someone told me that many years ago, and I think that's a great outcome. It's quite entertaining doing interviews sometimes.
So avoid the double negatives, right?
Yeah, well, because people don't like to do it, and when you're going for a job interview, you want to impress. And so to say, oh no, I don't know how to do that, and no, I wouldn't do that, and the answer they really want to hear is yes. But you've got to know where your boundaries are, and you've got to be able to say, no, I don't know that, or I need assistance.
So how did you get the right level of critical thinking in your business, and effective decision making? You've covered a little bit of this, but I just want to go further. We restructured some of our management team, so I think to have effective decision making, you've got to have it cross-pollinised across some of the different business units. Too many times we had heads of business units making major decisions. Actually, that's something we did on interviews as well. We got somebody outside of that team to sit on the interview for senior roles, because they look at things differently. And and it's hard to make effective decision making, but there's a process, and there should be due process that goes through, and having some structure. So even on project management, we sort of gave a template to help people on project management in these are the steps you must go through. It could be 2 bullet points, it could be 10 pages long depending on the project, but you've got to do that to try and be more effective in your decisions, because you can make the decisions, but it might have taken too long, you haven't taken in all the factors into account, and and sometimes you have to, and it'll cost you a lot more in the long run, and I've learnt the hard way on that too, so some of my executives. So, and that's because you don't make effective decisions, or making decisions on the run. And you have time pressures, and you have to do that, but you have to be decisive, but you have to make sure you've got all the facts you can, you've scanned the market, scanned the environment, and then you make a decision, and you make a decision in brainstorming that as well. So any major decision, we tried to do that at the executive team also. If it's at the mine site, you expected the mine site to talk about it first, and then then for it to go to the management team. An adage I've always believed in.
It was hard though.
Yeah, it's always tough. The adage I've always believed in is that the CEO's role is wonderful moments strung together between hours of terror. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I wouldn't use terror though. I'd probably use fear. Because I think terror doesn't come across right for me, but fear would be. And the reason I say that is because sometimes you are scared. Sometimes you just want to go and hide. When I did my feedback on my 360 in my leadership style one year, and I'd lost my confidence. I actually said I'd become a bit of an ostrich on some things. I buried my head in the sand, and I should be the eagle, soaring across and coming down and helping people when I need to. And that was very confronting doing that. And but you know what it showed is that we all have faults, and I think for that is just, it's critical that we do that. And if we don't share the good and the bad of ourselves, we're not going to get to that right answer.
So a year later, how'd the 360 degree look then?
It had improved significantly, but it was not something I was still proud of. If I'm completely honest, I'm not a very good liar, so that's. But you know, they definitely had improvement. But I think people know that you're trying. I mean, I'm very high on perfectionistic and working hard, and the perception is I expect everybody else to do what I do, and I don't think I'll ever get rid of that. But I'm more conscious of that now. I definitely had a lot more in participative and collaborative, and a lot more blue.
You said before, and something I mentioned in the opening notes, the opening comments, you're passionate about skills and education. Mm-hmm. How do you see the skills base in Queensland, and how is it developing, do you think?
Look, I sit on the Skills Queensland board, and the reason I actually, when I was president of the QRC, wrote the letter to the Premier then, Anna Bligh, to try and say that we really need to do something with skills shortage on behalf of the Queensland Resources Council. And I was really happy, and so was a lot of parties, that that was going to be set up. Now, it wasn't set up ideally in how we wanted to. And now what's happened is that, you know, the recent decisions, there was the task force that said it should keep it as a separate independent body. There was a Commission of Audit report that said it, and the government recently announced that it's going to be absorbed back into the department. So I find that disappointing, in that it hasn't worked being in the department, and absorbing it back into the department, it hasn't worked before. Something's got to change, and it's got to be done differently. And you know, and I don't hold back in saying that, because I do feel strongly about it. The fact that you sit on that board means you're doing it because you feel strongly about skills. The skills shortage and infrastructure constraints are the key biggest issues of why Australia lagged and lost market share in the mining industry. They are the key issues that we have in terms of why we had to overpay for people and just try and get people training costs. And when the market comes back, and when the mining industry is impacted, it's got a domino impact. So you've got construction then complaining that they have to pay, and then they poach, and everybody ends up having to pay more for their employees. And it spirals out of control. And so I think if we don't look at doing that and addressing it in the future, and we've got to train for jobs. We shouldn't be training for what people want to do. People can pay to do that. But the goal should be for Queensland, and where government's involvement is they've got to be able to train. I know some people, a few students might not want to hear that, but it has to be, you have to train for jobs. And if people want to do training because they like it, well, good, pay for it.
Just before I get to you to ask you the questions that you'd like to raise of Nicole, being in the State Library of Queensland, where do you see Queensland's rich history having a place in modern day-to-day decision-making?
Look, I think Queensland has got a great place and a great foundation to work from. You know, we're leaders in IT. We've made leaps and bounds forward in medical. We were leaders in mining. You know, we're not anymore. And you've got tourism. We've got the Great Barrier Reef and all these great things. And I think we could, and we're good in education as well, something I say with QUT all the time. So, you know, we need to put our place on the map, and we have. And if you look at, in terms of the people that we produce around the world, Queensland has punched above its weight. We used to define the work hard, play hard, but punch above your weight, can-do attitude, and I think Queensland could really do that, because we've accomplished a lot for such a small state, and I think we sometimes don't celebrate those successes like in an organisation. I don't think Queensland does it, and I think if you look at a lot of people and a lot of the things we do, a lot of the companies that are in Queensland, a lot of them are pretty well run, and they're things to be proud of.
Yeah, that's true. So, last question before I get to the audience. Where to from here for you, post-CEO role? I mean, what do you feel your opportunities at present?
Well, I've decided I'm now motivated to go and get a job and be proactive, and I needed to have a break, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and I'm a pretty decisive person, so the last 18 months has been a journey, a big journey. I've got to know myself a lot better, become a lot more hands-on mother. I'm better equipped to be a more hands-on executive and be a mother at home when I get home after all the other things are done. And so for me, it's the next opportunity could really take me anywhere. Is I've looked at this now as, instead of thinking, well, I should just do this and pigeonhole myself, I've had the conversations with a lot of people, and it really could be anything next. What is important to me, and I've defined it, and it's literally, I've sent my CV out, and you might find that odd now, but I've gone and met with recruiters in the last month and just said, look, I'm really motivated, I'm keen to get back, got the fire in my belly again, and I want to be an executive, I can articulate that. And there's really 3 criteria that I have. The first one is I've got to learn and develop. I don't want to do something that I've already known and I've already done before. I've got to add value. I feel if I couldn't add value and I felt I was adding value, and therefore it's really got to be an executive role or a very senior management, in that I can influence and drive change. Otherwise I think I'd be very frustrated. And it's got to be in a company, and when you work in a company, that you get the culture right and you strive, and it wasn't perfect, don't get me wrong, but you strive to get that. Is if you've got a company that's got a good culture or aspires to have a good culture. And so if it's dog eat dog, I don't really want to work there. So for me, and then I got asked, well, what about remuneration? I said, well, that's not the same ranking. I said, it's the package for me. And if you can deliver that package, then I'd probably consider whatever industry or different types of roles, and the salary is probably a secondary issue against those top 3 issues, because that's what's important to me and what drives me. Because if you don't enjoy what you do, you won't be good at it, and the chance of it succeeding is pretty slim in my view. So you've got to go back to where you can get your fire in your belly and you're motivated to go and do something and add value.
Over to you. If you'd like to raise the first question. Out the back here, could you just wait for the microphone, will you? Thanks.
It's always daunting when you can ask questions from them.
Hi there, thanks for that. I'm just wondering, you spoke a lot about foreign investment and wages in Australia. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on foreign workers coming into Australia.
Sorry?
Foreign workers, it was on the news quite a bit last year.
So 457 visas... Goodness me. 457 visas is something that is a topical conversation in the mining industry. I think for me, you've got to be able to deliver, and if it's about Australia delivering growth, you get taxes and you get a lot of added multiplier benefits from that. But you've got to go to Australia first, and if those resources aren't there in Australia, therefore then you'll have to get them to come in. Now, that's probably why you should go temporarily to get that in, and that comes back to the skills. Like I said on Skills Queensland, well, why wouldn't we look at who comes in on 457 visas and target some of our training there? Because there's a good start in that. Obviously we've got a lack of skills in that area. And so if we get the skills right and the training right, you shouldn't have to do that. I don't believe in doing it just to get wages down. I think we've got to deal with, that's a bigger issue and a complex issue that everybody, people, governments, organisations have to work together to come to a solution on, and that will take time.
Next question.
Nicole, I seem to detect a little bit of negativity towards technical people. Now, perhaps that's...
I'm technical, I'm finance, that's technical.
True. I was thinking of weaving that whole concept into my question, but you picked it up straight away anyway. But so I'm an engineer, so I'm probably hypersensitive to the message that I misinterpreted. Could you give us some guidelines about how how technical and non-technical people can work together?
And tell us about the sensitivity of engineers at the same time.
Yeah.
Too much information.
And I probably, Ray spoke to me beforehand, and we said that he wanted to flesh out the feeling of being in finance with a whole bunch in a male-dominated technical industry. So that probably message you get is a little bit about, well, it's how I felt being a finance person. I mean, I got told I was dead wood and overheads. So that's pretty hard to accept too. So and engineers don't get told that. So, but it's not a negative issue against engineers. It's more we think very differently. And because I was a financial person, the technical people, so the message was right there, and that on that point, found that harder to deal with in the structure and the different ways that I looked at things when we'd been previously run by an entrepreneur who was an engineer. But engineers and accountants, I think very, very similarly because we're both highly technical, we've got rigour, we're process driven, and I think we both need help in strategy and all of those other areas for training. The engineers need more help in. The biggest thing I think that lacks, if you take the strategy, the executive, no matter what background you come from, out of it, is engineers need to understand the financial disciplines. They've got to look at things cost benefit. You've got to understand the costs and the drivers of making those decisions. Too many times, sometimes they're from gut, then and your answer could be that, but you should just make sure. From financial people, they've got to have operational acumen. And a lot of them don't. And the best way you can have to work together, I remember saying, we outsourced our mine planning to begin with, and I said to the contractor, you and I are never going to get on and be able to do our jobs. You can't do your job without me, and I can't do my job without you. And so therefore, I need to understand, help me understand what you do, and then I can help you understand what I do. And I can remember him saying, I've worked in this industry for 20 years and nobody's ever said that to me. And I said, so the thing is, you've got to, I suppose that's that inquisitiveness thing. I've never been described that way before, but it's really, really important not to be afraid to ask questions. And if you don't ask questions, you're never going to know the answer. And the best thing people can do, no matter if you're from operational to non-operational people, is you've got to understand and accept and feel positive about what value they add and what they bring, because if you don't, you demoralise the other team either way, and you undermine what they do. And it's amazing. I mean, I used to say to the finance team when I was the CEO, the best thing you can do is add value to the operational people. So don't just sit there and say there's a variance of this and why is that out. Try and help them of why it's out. So why is overburden so far out? Oh, the drag line was down. What happened with the drag line? Try and help them, seek them to understand. And the best thing you can do as a finance person is support them to make better decisions. Because really that's what it's about when you're in the finance, and keeping the string on the purse.
There's a question here from Peter.
So I hope that answered your question. And if I didn't like engineers, I wouldn't have survived, trust me. Because it was run by engineers.
You glossed over one thing. It's been a fantastic interview, but you made 3 quick decisions to step up.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could just tell us what was going on inside you that enabled you to make those step-up decisions. Because a lot of people can't make those decisions, but you made, I think I counted 3 quite quickly. Mm-hmm. So why did you say yes? What was going on inside you that enabled you to make those decisions?
The first one, I wanted to learn and develop and try something new. The CFO role of a publicly listed company, to step up to do that, I felt I could back myself in that area. I didn't have any problem in confidence that side there. I was very good. I understood the technical side. I loved that side of it too, and I thought it would allow me to grow. And if I didn't accept that role, I probably had to leave the organisation. And I liked, because we were small and we got the breadth, and I put my hand up and I took the initiative, and Ken gave that to me and others around, so that I was growing at a rapid pace, and if I could go and work for another organisation and be pigeonholed into finance. So that wasn't, but it was still a bit daunting. The hardest one for me was, I really didn't have a choice in the CEO in one respect. The deputy CEO role, I took many weeks to decide to accept that role, and as I said, is that I was a mother. It was way out of my comfort zone. I was managing engineers and mining operations that I hadn't done before, and I'm not a miner. But I felt that I knew enough about the business and the drivers of the business that I could do that. But if I hadn't spoken to some mentors and people who probably saw the capability in me more than what I was prepared to back myself, I wouldn't have done it. I absolutely wouldn't have done it, and I'm glad I did. And I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've learnt a lot by making those mistakes so along the way. When I became CEO, it was personal circumstances for Ken. It was really difficult as well from an organisation perspective. So, and the hardest part was that, you know, you do it because it needs stability. And so when I was made acting CEO and CEO, until I was made the CEO MD, I was really still the acting CEO. It was till why the board had time to decide what to do. Because that period was 4 months between I was made Deputy CEO to then. And it was before its time. And I've been quoted as saying that before. And I had to, and the reason, the fact that I was already in there, it would have been harder to walk away than to get in there and fight and to try and do my best. And the same thing is that, you know, I got brought up on that, you know, you give it your best shot and don't see it as a failure. Look at it as a learning experience. And I remember someone saying to me, well, you know, it doesn't matter, you can get back up again. And I've read something that's what as leaders is you generally, you do get knocked down and you have to pull yourself back up again. But it hasn't been easy, but nothing's easy in life really. And I think you lack confidence at times, and that's where mentors, coaches and other people are really good to talk to. And, you know, I lack confidence, as I said, as a CEO, and it really showed in my leadership style. And people knew, so I might as well admit that I knew that too and share what I was going to do about it.
Nicole, Ken Talbot's got to be given a lot of credit because he understood his own limitations and he understood your capacities and he identified those effectively, very quickly. What do you think he would say today if he was here about you?
He'd probably say I've come a long way. You know, he was very proud of me in one respect, but he disagreed with some things that I did too. I remember having the comment to him, I can't be your puppet, I've got to live and die by my own sword. And you know, I'd love to hear your comments and get your experience, but ultimately I'm the CEO now and I've got to make that decision. That's really hard when for 8 years beforehand you're a master-servant relationship. And I think what he would say is that I have slowed down, I've grown as a person. I think he'd be proud where I got the culture from in the company. There are things though that he definitely wouldn't be proud of and that he wouldn't like. You know, he felt that I had too much structure and process. When I employed a legal person, what was I doing to the culture of the company? That was the first conversation we had when we had a disagreement. That, you know, so, but I've just said that, you know, that was a fundamental belief for me, and we were outsourcing, and one of our lawyers is here, so we're outsourcing legal fees that were costing us millions of dollars. That's not smart to me from a financial background, when we could get someone in for half the price in-house and just get them to do the other stuff that, and so I looked at things in a lot more on a financial basis. So, I mean, I'd hope he would be really proud, but he's not here to ask, which is probably a good thing in one respect that he couldn't say that for the bad things about me. But I would rather hear the bad things you have to say about me and have him here.
Another question? Jen? There's a microphone coming in.
Nicole, what advice would you give to other young people who have executive aspirations?
Oh, I've done speeches before, and I suppose I should, you know, the things that come straight to my mind, enjoy what you do, you'll be better at it. Embrace change. You know, there's 3 things in life. You've got death, taxes, and change. You can't control those, and they'll always be there. And you've got to be able to deal with change, and you've got to be agile to deal with that. And the world today is more global, quicker, and we've got to do that. Take the initiative, speak up if you're not happy, do it respectfully. You know, I went in and resigned once to Ken and said, you know, I'm over it. I've had enough. I'm not enjoying it, and he told me he wasn't accepting my resignation. And I just said, huh? And he just said, you come back tomorrow and talk to me. You're too emotional. You're looking at this emotionally. And thank goodness he did do that. But you know, and I said, and that's where he pointed out very clearly to me I was part of the problem, because I did put my hand up for too many things. And so the thing I will say is, you know, working harder doesn't actually necessarily get you there. And I didn't understand that until a couple of years ago. And I think it comes back to having the confidence, take the opportunities that come across your path. And I think what I said earlier, don't look at things as failures, and it's hard to do, easier said than done. but look at them as learning experiences. Because if we went and did a course and we failed the test, it's not the end of the world. And we sort of think putting our hand up for a job and doing something to get some experience and we weren't really good at it's a failure. Well, it's an experience. You now know that you're not really good at that, and so therefore you can go somewhere else. I think the way we look at things is really interesting, and how we, there's a book that the QUT pointed out, that the art of choosing, and it's really interesting why we make choices, and it's interesting on why we do things, and if you understand some of those things better, it actually helps you make your decisions better. But don't let age, gender, if I let age, gender, background stop me, that's what I said to me, you're female, you're young, and your finance background, how did you get the job? I don't know what the answers meant you want me to say there, but I worked hard and I understood the business and I was in the right place at the right time, or maybe the wrong place at the wrong time, whatever way you wanted to look at it. But you've got to be able to back yourself. And when you don't have the confidence and you lack that, and you will, well, most people do, I definitely did, is have good people who help support that. And that lonely at the top doesn't have to be. It took me a long time to work that out as well. You'd be surprised how many people feel exactly the same way as you do.
Final question? Yep.
Nicole, you bared my heart.
You talked about going to Harvard and learning about strategy. How did Macarthur go about strategy, and what did you learn makes for good strategy, effective strategy process?
The first thing, if you could have the best goal in the world, and if you can't communicate it and it's not clear to everybody else, it's not going to get delivered, unlikely. So you've got to have really clearly defined goals, you've got to be able to articulate them and communicate them well, and if you don't, and the next thing we did was got to do the training to allow people to think strategically. And the best thing is get people involved. Like the first year I did it, I thought it was a great strategic plan, but nobody bought in on it. And so therefore you've got to bring everybody with you, and they've got to build their own strategies in their own business units and have that way to think. And the ultimate goal could still be the same, because that is my choice, where we all know where we're going. It's sort of the steps we got there. You've got to let people to come up with their steps, and as long as they get to the goal at the end and they do it the right way, to the values. The other one is making sure you have your KPIs aligned to it. Different things drive different people. Money drives some, but ultimately I don't find many people who don't want to do a good job if they are enjoying their job and they want to be there. So if you value the people and show how what they do is aligned to the ultimate goal in some form or another, and KPIs and their performance is managed on that basis, I wish I'd done that way years earlier. Because everybody, the same thing, wants to feel valued, and so that's not a soft issue. The hard issue is there's a clear KPI and you'll deliver on it and there's no bonus if you don't. And that's an easy outcome to do. But when you actually can align that to something that they can control and that they can see how it links to their piece in the puzzle to what the organisation's doing, it's very powerful.
Could I ask you please to thank Nicole Hollows?
And I would certainly like to thank you, Nicole, for being such a self-aware leader. And it was really interesting to hear you talk about asking questions, because I think you're right, it's a really important skill. And the other thing that resonated for me was taking the time to reflect, because as you said, you don't always bring people with you when you're quick and you want to go somewhere. You've got to take time out for reflecting and how other people are working. So look, it was wonderful to hear you speak about your style and your approach and your experiences. And I also want to thank Ray, who I understand he didn't tell you, but he's jet lagged, and so I think he did a brilliant job regardless. So thank you guys.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
And I'd also like to let you know that if you want to revisit the conversation or share it with others, the webcast will be available on the State Library of Queensland website within a week. And the next Game Changers event will be on the 19th of June, another Wednesday. This time Ray will be talking to Screw Turner, the founder and CEO of Flight Centre. This will be the final Game Changers event for the year, and we will have some other events during the year. And the next event will be a symposium, and this is the first time we will have done this as part of the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame. And this one will be called Navigating Our Business History. It'll be held here on the 19th of June with keynote speakers Professor Geoffrey Bolton, distinguished Australian historian and author, Dr. David Allison, Associate Director for Curatorial Affairs at the Smithsonian. They will discuss why business history matters and the value of engaging with and interpreting business history. And that's what we're about with the Hall of Fame. And more details of that event can be found on the State Library website. And finally, the 2013 Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame induction dinner will be held on the 25th of July at the Brisbane Convention and Exhibition Centre. It promises to be an exciting evening with the announcement of this year's inductees, guest MC Sharon Gadella from 7 News, Ray Weeks, and entertainment from the Deep Blue Orchestra. So tickets are also available on the website. See halloffame.slq.qld.gov.au. So now please join us on the Queensland Terrace for refreshments, and I encourage each of you to take the time to get to know one more person this evening while you're here. Thank you.